I wouldn't be surprised that both President Putin and President Xi would themselves be very happy to have the United States of America pulling on the same side of the tug of war, so that you leave it to the Europeans to do their act and to really, as it were, lick their wounds as former colonizers.
This is the journey to one Africa.
On the 3rd day of September, the year 2025, something that is unique will happen. The Russians and the Chinese will have a meeting. And that meeting will be iconic in the sense that in the minds of many commentators, it is designed not only to demonstrate the camaraderie between the Russians and the Chinese, but also to send an unequivocal message, particularly to the West, as led now quite actively by President Macron of France and Prime Minister Steinmeier of the United Kingdom, that there is a counterweight to the European attempt at retaining their hegemony in international relations. And I think this must be understood in the context that the world is progressively moving towards multipolarity. But the Western world is taking the view that that multipolarity is not a good thing, their rhetoric notwithstanding. And therefore, when it is seen that the Russians and the Chinese are becoming a lot more intimate in terms of their collaboration, I think a few things arise. One, Russia is a nuclear power. China is a nuclear power. And China is the second largest economy in the world. In fact, we can now say that China has become the factory of the world in terms of manufacturing, and it is a power that is beginning to project politically, economically, and even militarily. And it is acquiring new friends through soft power within the Asian region, within the Pacific region, and as far as the continent of Africa and Latin America. Russia is also moving in that direction, that in addition to being a political powerhouse within its neighborhood, there is a sense in which even its economy, which it was assumed would be devastated by the sanctions, appear to be weathering the storm, and it is acquiring new friends or strengthening existing friendships. And we have seen that with their presence in the Sahelian region, their presence in Central African Republic, their presence in Sudan, their presence in different parts of Latin America, and the coming into this intimacy of China, or what one may call Russo-Chinese alliance, is something that I think must worry the West, which begs the question, what is the source of concern? The source of concern must be seen in the context of the fact that as all this is happening, the major European powers are losing their grip. France is losing its grip. In fact, they surrendered their last military outpost in Africa, in Dakar, in Senegal, and they have lost quite a number of their allies in French West Africa. And even La Côte d'Ivoire, which continues to be an ally, they are beginning to receive hostility from the populace. The British are also finding themselves in a similar situation, that the Commonwealth, which they call the Commonwealth of Independent Nations, is a body that is weakening by the day. And we see that even within the United Kingdom itself, there are internal contradictions in the Union. So these are powers, namely the United Kingdom and France, which are losing their grip. The sun is setting on their empires, and they are becoming desperate and fearful, particularly because their populations are also aging, and in many ways their economies are not as vibrant as they ought to be. Another player that must not be ignored in that context is Germany, because Germany in this situation is also beginning to project her power, and is doing so in a very clever way through its organization known as the GIZ. You now find them with footprints across the world and in the continent of Africa, engaging in what is referred to as soft power. So all these factors conjoined must make Europe very worried that how do we deal with a China that is progressively becoming very sophisticated, and is not just trade of goods and services. Look at their military, look at their engagement in the area of cybernation, in the area of artificial intelligence, in the aviation industry, and all these things which define the fourth and fifth industrial revolution. And if then they have more friends, then it is worrying worrying Europe, and must be a source of concern. And the other thing that must worry Europe in this context is the proxy war that is being prosecuted in Ukraine. That to the extent that the war does not appear to be going according to script, to the extent that the war appears to be going on, to the extent that the United States of America is ambivalent as to how it will behave, it must be remembered that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, was very clear in the early days of his presidency, saying that Europe must now take care of its bills within the North Atlantic Trading Treaty Organization. And we have seen how they have tried to improve their expenditure in the UK, in France, and in Germany. And you have in the United States of America a government that is not as clear as to whether it would cast its lot with Europe. And I remember at one time President Trump, in his quest to ensure that he brokered peace between Ukraine and Russia, reminded Europe that there is a big, beautiful ocean between Europe and the United States of America, saying that we are not necessarily going to join you. If you choose to fight this war, we may sit pretty several thousand miles away and leave you to your fate. All these factors must then worry the West. And China doesn't talk much. It doesn't make noise. Russia also does not make noise in the manner that Western Europe does. So the diplomacy is sometimes subtle, many times subterranean, and I think it is going to ruffle feathers, if it has not ruffled feathers, when the meeting takes place on the 3rd day of September 2025. I want to imagine that Western intelligence must now have deployed all their arsenal, human and otherwise, with a view to either torpedoing this or trying to understand what is going to be the end game after that rendezvous. I hold the view that the Russo-Chinese alliance is sending shivers, and I want to imagine that the diplomatic fronts are being worked, metaphorically speaking, on a daily basis. But as we have learned during the short term of the second coming of the presidency of President Trump, the only predictable thing about Trump is unpredictability. He does not say what he is going to do, whether it will be another tariff regime, whether it will be a new sanction regime, whether it will be supplying long-range missiles to Ukraine, whether it will be supplying more Patriot missiles to Ukraine, whether it is going to be more sanctions on the officials from Russia. Nobody knows, and anybody who pretends to know is swimming into the shark-infested waters of speculation. But that does not stop us from building scenarios. And scenario number one to me is that possibly as we speak now, the administration of President Trump is doing everything within its power to engage President Putin and to engage President Zelensky, that there is a wisdom in having something as an armistice or a modus vivendi in the style of South and North Korea. So that once you have an operational modus vivendi and armistice, then it will freeze things and then negotiations can begin to happen. With the understanding as a quid pro quo on the part of Ukraine that we will freeze your application to join the European Union or NATO. That is scenario number one. Scenario number two is that Ukraine becomes very intransigent because of the encouragement of France and Germany and the United Kingdom, and says that as a condition precedent to any kind of ceasefire, the territories currently occupied, including Crimea, must be returned. And if that is the position that is taken, I want to believe that Russia will not play ball, particularly on the basis of the arguments that are in the public domain, which would then mean that some European countries would want to be engaged a lot more in the conflict, because in the minds of some European powers, this is the time to defeat Russia. And the question is, can you defeat Russia? It is not something that is not going to be easy. But Russia may also want to say that we now have allies. And China, in my view, would not be averse to saying, we are going to be that ally. We are big, we are nuclear, and if you want us to bloody our noses, we are going to cast our lot with the Russians. That is another scenario, in which event the Europeans would want to say that this is now a NATO affair, which brings another spin. Will the Trump administration then say we are putting boots on the ground? And I don't see appetite for that in the United States, particularly on the basis of extant evidence. So that the United States may very well say this is a war that is being fought in distant lands. We are not going to be interested in it, and our participation will be very token to the extent that we supply some arms, and particularly because those arms are also giving us access to the natural resources of Ukraine. And the other scenario, which I think is unlikely but not impossible, is that America becomes more involved on the side of Europe, and who knows, never say never, casts its lot with Russia and China, and reminds Europe, remember in 1990, we said not 1 inch more, let Ukraine be Finlandized, as we used to say in the early days. Let them be neutral, so that they are neither with Russia in terms of intimacy or with the NATO or the European Union. And I have no doubt in my mind that minds better than I in the diplomatic arena are working along all these, because in all these countries one sees that the appetite for conflict is reducing by the day. And that appetite is one that ought not to be fed by megalomaniacs or egoists who think that this is the time for yet another conflict in the continent of Europe, whether wittingly or unwittingly. That is what I see happening. And I'm waiting, like all the rest, with bated breath. What will be the communique that will be issued by Russia and China on the 3rd day of September? If China was to directly and openly support Russia, then it would send jitters in Europe. I think there is a sense in which the apparent neutrality of China is something that sends the message that Russia is vulnerable. But if China were to enter into the war, first of all, from a purely trade perspective, international trade would be disrupted in a very major way. Because as I've already indicated, and as we all know, China is the factory of the world. Most of the European companies today are importing their goods from China. So China joining Russia and therefore saying goods are not flowing as they ought to be will have many implications at the domestic level and at the trade level, and economies will tank up. So I think it is a scenario that one does not want to imagine. Of course, as it is now, they always speculate that they think China is supporting Russia, but they have not come out explicitly to say we are now with Russia. And they have, of course, as you've seen on a number of occasions, tried to say diplomacy is the only avenue that is desirable. So it would be a game changer. And when I listen to the rhetoric of the United States as evident through President Trump, actually is indicative of what he wants to do. I don't want to engage in battle with Russia. One can always read that, but I may be misreading, but I suspect I'm reading right. That I'm giving the opportunity for this thing to be resolved. Remember, even when he says, I thought that this war would end very quickly, and then it didn't end very quickly, but he says that I still have a good conversation with President Putin, which means he believed that Putin is a person that he can do business with. And Trump is a master at transactional politics. What is in it for the United States of America, which is underlined by that slogan, making America great again. And if in his interpretation, making America great again is to abandon Europe to its own design, I am not sure that he will not do it. The Europeans had better be very clever in this regard. And when I talk about the Europeans in real terms, you are talking about the UK, you are talking about France, and you are talking about Germany. The rest will play the gooseberry, or will be very ambivalent, or blow hot and cold. Is there indeed a line between political games and power? Is it not just one word for the same thing? But in order to, I see what you are trying to say, that what we are saying is that when you play politics, sometimes China presents itself as non-threatening, almost weak at times. But I think that is a strategy. China has discovered that in order to get into spaces, you don't need to show arrogance. You don't need to project raw power. That you can be strong and powerful in a very silent way. And you can see their diplomacy. Almost velvet, iron fists in velvet gloves. And I think it is very effective. In the Republic of Kenya recently, when a survey was conducted, 71% of those who were surveyed said that they preferred China to the United States. And how are they projecting this? By being involved in things that touch people's daily lives. They're involved in infrastructural development. They are involved in offering scholarship for people to go and learn in China. They are opening Confucius Institutes in major universities of Africa at a time when the Americans are withdrawing their support through USAID, and the Europeans are following suit. But by reduction of what they call aid, the Chinese are coming. They are saying, we are not even giving you aid. You are just good friends and brothers. Of course, that is not always true, that they are giving it for nothing. There is something in it for them. But that non-threatening approach is what is endearing China as a country to different parts of the world. Not only in the continent of Africa, but you can see it even in Latin America, you can see it in Asia, and you can see the meetings, and you can see the reactive diplomacy. When you see the Americans reacting and having meetings with the Japanese, having meetings with the South Koreans, having meetings with the Filipinos, it is in reaction to the soft diplomacy of the Chinese, which has seen them engage with different parts of people in that neighborhood in the Pacific region. You saw only recently the meeting with the Chinese with the Australians. So it's interesting. There are too many moving parts in this machine called the world, and one can only wait and see, even as the parts continue to move, sometimes in an apparently uncoordinated manner, but coordinated nevertheless. You know, on the third day of September, many things could happen. And I'm one who believes that in international diplomacy, you never say never. And, Trump loves the big stage. And that stage will be large. So if he appears there even for just 1 hour and is part of the photo op and part of the interview that follows, it will be part of his making America great again by having this association with the leading powers in the world, militarily, Russia and China. So never say never. I wouldn't be surprised that both President Putin and President Xi would themselves be very happy to have the United States of America pulling on the same side of the tug of war, so that you leave it to the Europeans to do their act and to really, as it were, lick their wounds as former colonizers. So it's a possibility, and is one that I would myself and many people would love to see, in order to reset international diplomacy and international engagements. You know, the world is in a very interesting space after the World War. You know, the World War II was an occasion for the unquestioned emergence of the U.S. as the hegemon, militarily, economically, so that when the UN is created in San Francisco in 1945, is also a statement that we are the Alpha and Omega. When the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, and later the WTO came into the play, and Europe is helping in the reconstruction of rather America is helping in the reconstruction of Europe. America is really the nation. And when they start engaging in different parts of the world after the Nixon presidency with the American Peace Corps, most of whom we knew were also spies, and then of course they are present in terms of organizations such as USAID. America is present everywhere. In health, in education, American cultural centers are being built. I think after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the year 1989 and the reunification, they are actually more energized as a unipolar world, and America remains the hegemon with the Europeans as the lapdog of the United States of America. But something has happened. And there is a book which is very beautiful in terms of defining the rise of China from Deng to Xi. Within 30 years, China quietly, silently has emerged as an economic power. And when that has happened and it has become the second largest economy in the world, replacing Japan and of course leaving the Germans in their wake, then it has redefined many things. And see the Chinese rise not only as traders in the economy. Look at their presence in artificial intelligence. Look at their presence now in the aviation world with their new aircraft. Look at them now beginning to project military power and having military bases outside of their neighborhood. And look at the intimate relationship that they now have with Russia. In other words, the world is moving towards multipolarity. And that multipolarity is one that has seen the weakening of Europe, so that Europe is losing her spheres of influence. European countries are losing their spheres of influence throughout the world, and they are desperate. And the Americans are also losing their grip in critical areas. See, with the coming into power of President Trump and the disbandment almost of the USID. So they are leaving room, and the vacuum that they are leaving is being occupied now. Occupied by the Chinese, occupied by the Russians, and even there are new pretenders in the bloc that are coming into these spaces from the Arab world. The Emiratis and the Qataris and even Turkey are coming into these spaces. So what I see is multipolarity, the emergence of BRICS, with Brazil being a dominant economy in South America. All these are redefining the world, and with the Trump's anti-immigration law, you can also see that even old friends are ruffled. Mexico and Canada are ruffled, and countries that would ordinarily just agree with the United States of America unquestioningly, such as Australia, you can see their prime minister very happy to meet the prime minister of China. So this multipolarity is, in my view, what is going to define the future of the world. It may be messy, but ultimately we'll pick the pieces when we are done with each other. But I think we are in a very messy period where many people are thumping their chests, and many countries are thumping their chests and are no longer fearful. In other words, there is a beautiful saying amongst the Twi in Ghana. The European powers and the Americans have chased what they thought to be the cowards of the world, and they have now met the courage of the cowards. When you corner a cat, the cat turns and can be dangerously courageous. That is what is happening in the world. It is no longer the case that when America or Europe sneezes, the rest of the world goes into a coma. No, they just sneeze back.